Hello and welcome to the Genre Lectures on Fiction. There are several slideshows to view on the genre of fiction, so please make sure that you view them all. This first slide presentation is going to focus on two questions. What is fiction? And how is it different from nonfiction? The word fictional means not real. Fiction basically means a story that we all agree has been made up by the author, either for the purpose of entertaining you or for the purpose of enlightening you on a larger truth. The best works of fiction are the ones that do both. In either case, though, it's understood that when you call a piece of writing fictional, you're saying that you made it up. Simple, right? Well, not quite. For one thing, there is such a thing as disbelief, which is to say, as soon as you tell your readers that you're telling them a lie, they will immediately shut down because who wants to hear a lie? This is your average reader. When your average reader picks up a book of fiction, he already knows, right before he's read even the first line, that everything you're telling him never happened. The people in the story never existed, none of the action ever took place. So, how can they possibly enjoy the story if they already know none of this is true? Well, there is one thing that we call suspension of disbelief. That is to say, that part of you that says it's false is suspended, and the reader actually believes, for the time he's reading your work, that what you're saying feels true. Without that suspension of disbelief, we'd all just be liars. Certified liars. And look, your pants are on fire. But are all fiction writers just a bunch of really, really good liars? Well, no. At least not according to Ralph Waldo Emerson. What did Ralph Waldo Emerson mean when he said that fiction reveals a truth that reality obscures? He probably meant the same thing that Picasso said when he once declared that art tells the truth. He means that sometimes a story, even if made up, can help you understand something profound that you wouldn't otherwise understand without the story. There is a reason, for example, that all the greatest philosophers and prophets of all times use parables. There is a power in story that helps us to experience and understand the truth much better than anything else. That's why Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, and all the great philosophers prefer to tell a story rather than to lecture their students with complex esoteric theories. They didn't sit on top of a mound and say things like, "Disciples, now I'm going to explain to you the danger of evil. Evil is the discharge of energy that comes from the temporal lobe of the brain, blah, 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 blah." Rather, most of the teaching began with, "There once was a man who..." There are many writers who will arrive at the same conclusion. For instance, Khalid Hossein, the writer of The Kite Runner, said writing fiction is the act of weaving a series of lies to arrive at a truth. And Jodi Picoult says just because it's fiction, it doesn't mean it's any less true. That is to say, just because you're not saying that it's true, it doesn't mean that it could be. So, even though we may call a book or a short story a work of fiction, much of it could be representing a truth of some sort. In this chart, we see that truth starts with allegory and moves all the way to something based on a true story. Allegory is a story we made up to illustrate a larger truth. The famous Allegory of the Cave, written by the ancient philosopher Plato, is a story about a man chained to the darkness in a cave. He slowly becomes accustomed to a bright light. When at first he sees the light, though, he's confused and he thinks it's evil, and it obliterates everything else. In all his life he's seen only darkness, so naturally he reacts badly to the light. But slowly he gets accustomed to the light, and by he starts to see things. Things that he couldn't see before when he was in the darkness. This story is an allegory for knowledge. Plato told the story of the cave so that people would understand how the learning process really works. Similarly, although The Hunger Games is completely made up, it is a story about children fighting to the death in a super televised reality show that is supposed to be an allegory for the way that young people perceive war today and for the effects it has on us. Whereas The Grapes of Wrath was the made-up story of a family who lived during the collapse of the farming industry in the United States. Although the family and all the characters aren't real in the strict sense of the word, the misadventures that each of them experiences were all based on true stories of people who lived during that time. And finally, a book like On the Road by Jack Kerouac is so close to being a memoir that calling it fiction is almost just a convenience. Everything in that book really happened. The characters' names were changed, and a number of the characters maybe represented more than just one person. But basically, it was as close to the truth as you can get without calling the book a memoir. So, there are different degrees of truth. There is open truth, a truth to which the majority of us can agree it exists. And of course, there is speculation, which is to say, we don't really know what the truth may be, but we try to guess it. But in between these two polar opposites, there are many shades of gray. There is a hidden truth that may be implied but not expressed openly, a truth you have to read between the lines, and probable truth, which is something we think is true in all likelihood, even though we don't know for sure. Of all these degrees of truth and speculation, fiction falls somewhere in between them all, compassing them all, while also being not any one of them. I hope this gives you an idea of what fiction is, something that is made up, that arrives at a larger. In the next slideshow, we will discuss different forms of fiction. See you then.